Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is answer. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you're likely to hear the verb answer used is to mean to say or write something in response to someone or something. Many people think of questions and answers going hand in hand. So the idea that someone either verbally says something to you or says something to you through written form, and then you're responding to that. A second way to use the verb answer is to mean to provide a required response or responses to an exam, a test, or a quiz. Many people will think of this in the context of school and education and the idea that you must sometimes, occasionally, provide these required responses to measure our learning. The third way you'll hear the verb answer used is to act in reaction to some sound or notification. For this, think of a doorbell. Right? If you hear that sound, right, many people will go to the door to answer it or to act in response to that particular sound. We use this verb to also discuss a response to cell phone or just regular landline phones for those of you who still have them. Right? When we hear that ringing, when we pick the call up, we are acting in response to that sound. A fourth way to use the verb answer is to mean to defend oneself against a charge or some accusation. This is a fairly serious and formal usage of this verb, so I don't know that it's something you'll see commonly, but if you follow a lot of crime-related news, then you might see this verb being used to describe someone who is defending himself or herself. You should know that answer is a regular verb. Now, I'm going to have you quickly look at how I've spelled both the progressive and the past tense and participle forms. Right? So I've just added ing, I've just added ed. And some of my old students might be looking at this and going like, wait a second, Katie, this verb ends in a consonant-vowel consonant. We always talked about doubling it. Well, when we're dealing with two-syllable verbs, we have an exception to our normal rule of doubling. And that is when we are placing stress on that first syllable, we don't have to double the ending consonant. So here, the base verb, answer, we put the stress on the first syllable. And so that's why you're not seeing a second R on either the progressive or the past tense endings. So our progressive form, all we're doing is adding ing to form answering. And then the past tense and participle forms, again, are made by just adding ed. The base verb, answer, ends in an voiced sound, R sound. So our past tense ending is going to make a D sound. Answered, answered. Now let's spend a couple minutes looking at some phrasal verbs with answer. The first one we'll look at is answer back. This means to reply rather rudely to someone, particularly if that someone is in a position of authority. So for this, I always think about students, how they respond to teachers. Right? Generally, the teacher is in a position of authority. We might also think about children and how they respond to their parents. Again, parents are in a position of authority. So let's look at an example sentence. If I correct your behavior, you shouldn't answer me back or you'll be in more trouble. So here, maybe it's the start of a new school year or a new class, and a teacher is sort of giving his or her rules for the classroom. They're saying, like, if I correct something you're doing, don't reply rudely to me. A second phrasal verb you might hear is to answer for. This means to be held responsible for a particular problem. Let's look at another example. Prime Minister Modi must answer for the avoidable deaths. So this sentence is something I saw recently in an article talking about India and India's current and ongoing COVID crisis. The country seemed to have been doing fairly well the first year or so of the pandemic, but the last few months have been brutal. Many people have died, and there are people who believe that the leader of the country, the prime minister, needs to be held responsible for this. The final phrasal verb we'll look at is answer to. And this is to have to sort of explain to someone else why you did something or why you acted in a certain way. Let's look at another example. The CEO answered to the board about the company's response to the pandemic. So again, maybe we have a company that didn't react well. They were forcing people to come to their workspace, their office, what have you, and then many people got sick, and then people are looking and like, oh, that's a bad company. So the leader here, again, has to explain his or her actions in this situation. We're going to continue to practice using our verb of the day answer. And today we're going to focus on some modals. And our modals here today are going to be connected to what many books will call sort of advisability in the past. So in these situations, we are creating sentences where we are expressing regret. In these situations, what we're saying is like, we wish we would have acted differently. Maybe had we known something, or had we known what we now know, we would have done something differently. That's the idea of regret. We could also use these structures to sort of assign blame. Again, sort of showing someone else they are responsible for a negative thing that occurred. So what you're going to see here there are sort of 3 different ways in the affirmative to express this regret or blame. So let's look at one way. The official should have answered the senator's questions. Okay? So here, our advisability in the past, we're using should have, and then the participle form of our verb, should have answered. Okay? A second way to do it is with ought to have, and then the participle form, and you'll see that in our second example. You ought to have answered your phone when I called. So here's a sentence that really sounds like it's assigning blame. You could have helped in this emergency, or maybe something else that was rather urgent or needed to be fixed in a certain time period. A third way to express this advisability in the past is to use could have and then our participle form of the verb. The teacher could have answered your question directly. So maybe a teacher sort of talked around, sort of indirect, but the teacher's response was not very clear or direct. Now, we can also create negative sentences where we express regret or blame. There are just 2 ways to do that. One is to do should not have, and then the participle form. And the second way is to say ought not to have, and then the participle form of the verb. So let's look at 2 more examples. I should not have answered the door. Maybe someone who was there was really talkative and I wasted a bunch of time, so I have this regret. I wish I had not answered the door. Second sentence, they ought not to have answered the reporter's questions. So again, maybe someone is assigning blame for whatever happened after these answers were published or shared with a wider audience. If you want to ask someone a yes or no question about maybe something they wish they had done in the past, so again, asking if they have regrets or asking if they blame someone else, to do that, you just want to use the modal should. Then you'll have your subject, and then have and the participle form of the verb. Should we have answered all the questions in 60 minutes? Right? Maybe someone is realizing they didn't do so well on a test because they didn't watch their time, and is now kind of thinking through what would have led to a better grade on this particular test or exam. Now, let's spend a few minutes looking at words that are related to our verb answer. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. So, exact same spelling, exact same pronunciation. The first way you could use the noun answers to mean a thing said, written, or done in order to respond to some sort of question, statement, or situation. Let's look at an example of that. What was the teacher's answer? Right? So here someone is asking how a particular person responded to a question or some information. A second way to use the noun answer is to refer to a thing that has been written or said in reaction to a test or quiz question. So, an example of this usage, maybe you've been taking some online tests and you will see instructions like type your answers below. So those are your written responses to a particular quiz, for example. A third way to use the noun answer is to refer to the correct solution to a quiz or test question. An example of that. The answer to number 3 is 75. Okay? So again, what this means is the correct solution, not just any response, but one that is deemed to be right. A fourth way to use the noun answer is to refer to a solution to some problem. Here's an example of that. What's the answer to climate change? So how are we going to solve this particular problem? The next word we'll look at is an adjective. It's answerable. Okay? And if we look at the last 4 letters, our suffix here, A-B-L-E, right? We see the word able there, and that will help us understand that it means able to be answered. Here's an example of this usage. Is this an easily answerable question? So we all sometimes, I should say, at different points in our lives, we have all had questions for people who are experts in certain topics. And as we ask for advice, things might be very easy for them to answer, or they need to do research in order to provide that help or assistance. And the last word I'm going to leave you with today, it connects to our last adjective, right? So now we still have that we still have the suffix able, but now I've added the prefix un. This means not. So our definition here, not able to be answered. Here's an example of that. They have unanswerable questions as they deal with the grief of losing their child. So this can happen many times when people lose a loved one, right? And they kind of ask, why? Why did this happen? And unfortunately, that's generally not a question that can easily be answered. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.